She thought I was powerless. Just an old woman past her time. Someone easy to humiliate, easy to erase. At my own son's wedding, she didn't just slap me. She demanded the keys to the only home I had left. To her, I was nothing more than a burden to push aside. But what she didn't know was that the walls of my house held more than memories. They held a secret strong enough to shatter her world. And when the truth walked through those doors, everything changed. What happens when the person you try to erase turns out to be unforgettable? Dorothy Williams had lived in the same brick house for nearly 4 decades. To her, it wasn't just walls and a roof. It was the one place where she had raised her son, cooked Sunday dinners, and built a life after losing her husband. The neighbors saw her as quiet, maybe even fragile, but those who knew her understood the strength she carried behind her tired smile. Life wasn't easy, but it was hers. Each morning, she watered the roses her husband once planted, a routine that gave her comfort and a sense of continuity. Yet beneath the calm rhythm of her days, a storm was building. Subtle comments at family gatherings, a cold glance from her son's fiancé, whispers about moving forward and better opportunities. What seemed like ordinary family tension was something far darker. Dorothy could feel it. The sense that she was being pushed aside, treated as though her years of sacrifice meant nothing. She tried to ignore it, hoping love would hold her family together. But love, as she would soon discover, wasn't always stronger than greed or prejudice. At first, the comments seemed harmless. A joke here, a whisper there. Dorothy noticed how her son's fiancée, Rachel, would wrinkle her nose at the smell of her cooking, or brush off her traditions as old-fashioned. She never said the words outright, but her tone carried something sharper than disapproval. It carried disdain. To Rachel, Dorothy wasn't just old. She was in the way. The tension grew after the engagement. Family gatherings that once felt warm turned cold. Rachel's parents, polished and proper, looked at Dorothy with eyes that seemed to say she didn't belong in their world. They spoke loudly about modernizing, about making space for the future, and each time, their gaze landed on Dorothy's home, the house that had stood as a symbol of her family's survival. It wasn't just about property. It was about erasure. Dorothy felt it in the way Rachel corrected her speech, mocked her dentures, or dismissed her stories from a past she was proud of. Out with the old, Rachel would mutter, loud enough for Dorothy to hear. Her son stayed silent. That silence cut deeper than the words themselves. The wedding became the breaking point. What was supposed to be a day of unity became a stage for humiliation. In front of guests, in front of her own blood, Dorothy was shoved aside, treated like an unwelcome shadow. And then came the slap. Sharp. Public, a crack that echoed louder than the music. Gasps filled the room, but Rachel didn't stop there. With a smile that carried both cruelty and triumph, she demanded Dorothy's house keys, as if ripping away the last piece of her dignity. For a moment, Dorothy stood frozen, not from the pain of the slap, but from the realization that every suspicion had been true. This wasn't just about a home. It was about stripping her of identity, of worth, of place. And her own son, the child she had sacrificed for, stood by and watched. Whispers rippled through the guests. Some laughed, others turned away, but no one stepped forward. Dorothy was alone, or so it seemed, because what Rachel didn't know was that Dorothy's past carried more than hardship. It carried connections, loyalty, and a strength that no slap could erase. As Dorothy steadied herself, teeth aching, pride wounded, she felt something shift inside her. Rage, yes, but also resolve. Rachel thought she had won. She thought the humiliation was complete, but Dorothy knew the night was far from over. And when the doors of that wedding hall swung open, everything would change. The room went silent after the slap, but inside Dorothy's chest, the silence roared like thunder. Guests stared, some with pity, others with amusement, as if her pain was nothing more than entertainment. Rachel stood tall, her hand outstretched, demanding the house keys as though she was entitled to erase decades of sacrifice with a single gesture. Dorothy's son looked away. Shame painted across his face, yet his silence was an even louder betrayal. It wasn't just humiliation, it was erasure. She felt it in the sting of her cheek, in the cold dismissal in their eyes. They didn't see her as a mother, a widow, or even a human being. They saw an obstacle, a problem to be removed. Her knees trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of years of being underestimated. Every memory flashed, the long hours she worked to keep that home, the nights she spent alone after her husband's death, the sacrifices no one had seen, and now all of it was being stolen in a moment meant to strip her bare. Rachel smirked, whispering something cruel enough to draw laughter from a few nearby guests. That laughter cut sharper than the slap. It wasn't just about property anymore. It was about power, about pushing her aside because she was older, because she was different, because in their eyes she didn't deserve to stand among them. But what no one expected, what Rachel could never imagine, was that Dorothy wasn't alone. The sound came first, low and distant, engines, dozens of them. The vibrations grew until the walls themselves seemed to shake. Guests turned, confusion spreading like wildfire, as headlights pierced through the windows. The doors burst open and 15 figures in leather and steel filled the room. The smirk faded. Gasps replaced laughter. And in that moment the power shifted, because Dorothy's story wasn't over. It was only beginning. The room that once laughed at Dorothy now stood frozen. The daughter-in-law's smirk collapsed under the weight of fear, her hand that once struck trembling at her side. The same guest who had turned away from Dorothy now couldn't look her in the eye. For the first time they saw her not as someone disposable, but as someone untouchable. Dorothy didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need revenge through violence. Her presence, her resilience, and the support that stormed in behind her spoke louder than any slap could. That night she walked out of the hall with her dignity intact, her head high and her so-called family left in the wreckage of their own cruelty. But the scar of what happened didn't fade quickly, because this wasn't just about one house or one wedding. It was about a lifetime of being judged, underestimated, and erased. It was about how prejudice, whether whispered through mocking laughter or shouted in open humiliation, cuts deeper than anyone wants to admit. Dorothy's story is not unique. Around the world, countless people live through the same dismissal, the same quiet cruelty, the same belief that they are less than. But strength comes from remembering, you are never what their prejudice says you are. You are more. So the question remains, not just for Dorothy's son or his wife or their guests, but for all of us. How many more times will people have to prove their worth before the world finally sees it? Because behind every person dismissed, mocked, or erased, there's a story waiting to be heard.